Menscape The Podcast with Carl.J. Ashley, and proudly sponsored by the Functional Naturopathic Clinic.
Good evening and welcome everybody to Menscape The Podcast, sponsored by the Functional Naturopathic Clinic in Ennis. Today my guest is James Collins Ireland. We can just suffice to say James. How are you, James?
Good afternoon, Carl. Thanks for having me on the show, and hello there to the audience. I will share this link on my community page of YouTube after it's done and dusted and you send it on to me, Carl. How about that?
Yeah. We'll definitely do our best to share the chat. For the benefit of the gents in the Menscape group, as you're aware, I created a group there at the beginning of the lockdown, with men's sort of mental health being the focus in mind, with all the pubs and restaurants closed, as a resource for us to share information and to chat and what have you. Even though those restrictions have been lifted, I still saw a value in keeping the group going. But a lot of us don't know each other. So the podcasts have evolved as a way of obviously being able to introduce ourselves to the other gents in the group. So feel free to tell us a bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, fantastic. Firstly, that was a great idea to do that, to connect up. I mean, isolation, it's obviously a huge problem. And even for a lot of people that used to be involved in, maybe it was the pub, or maybe it was GAA, or maybe they used to meet in these social gatherings and they got broken down and they weren't reformed after this. I know this is going to be on YT, so you got to be a little bit cryptic. You have to use a bit of paranomasia, a little bit of play on words. So after the Nazi lock of the Downers, so things weren't, let's say their life did not go back. It wasn't a smooth transmission. So to go straight back into how things were. So a bit about myself. I set up my YT channel. I would have been platformed by other different individuals, the likes of Grant Trino would have been on his daily show. That was getting out to tens of thousands of people every single day. So that was pretty amazing. And I connected up with a few other netizens that share similar ideas to mine, and absolutely amazing. We've sort of formed a tribe. So it's absolutely amazing. I've had wonderful people on my show now. Ireland, it's quite a small country, but a lot of strong, resilient people there stood up. And I pretty much, all the main players, all the key figures that have helped to make a difference and are continuing to do so, I would be in contact with them on a regular basis.
So when I said to my kids a few years ago, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they said, I'm going to be a YouTuber, Dad. And I'm like, no. You can't make a living from that. You have to actually get a job and do something. Yeah. Are you telling me that this is your profession? You're a YouTuber. You're the real deal. What my kids were aspiring to, right?
Well, they wanted to be that. I wanted to be a DJ there for a good while, because I was always into house music, electronic music. But look, when this started, I was working in Burr, living in Tullamore. And look, the role was requiring me to wear a slave muzzle, and I just can't do that. So, and refused to put pressure on my respiratory organs and essentially to be a slave. I can appreciate other people that say they might have mortgages, they need to stay in that role to wear it. But I was in a position that I could just really refuse to do it. Of course, it wasn't up for debate. You had to do it, and it was a job that was in healthcare. So that was really at the start of it, in July, when the Nazi face nappies came in.
So I think I would regard myself as very much in the minority as well, of people that from day one was strictly no mask, no jab, no test. I just did not consent in any way to my own enslavement through this tyrannical system. But then again, I've been researching stuff for over a decade. I don't watch television. I don't read the newspapers. I'd read a David Icke book, which blown my mind around about 2009, 2010. I'd gone through a very difficult time in my life around 2011, 2012, which I documented in my first book, The Fox and the Scorpion Meets Cold Turkey, where I was very much suffering from depression, low self-esteem. I was in a marriage where I was basically the doormat and trying to please my parents, her, and not getting anywhere fast because there was a lack of authenticity. So things changed. I was at a crossroads in my life, and I suppose the whole thing collapsed in the sense that my father died, my marriage broke up, I lost my home, agreed to the family separation, and all of that stuff happened and catapulted me into an apartment in Limerick where I was living on my own. And this was after a car crash I'd had where I was run off the road by a bus full of Thai Buddhist monks coming back from an alms round near the Buddhist Centre in East Clare. And three published books later, I now live in Tipperary with a fantastic woman and still rebuilding my life one day at a time after all that. But it was pretty obvious to see from the journey I'd been on and how I'd always been a bit of a black sheep, or how I'd always been not so much cynical, but definitely suspicious and skeptical of any mainstream narrative. And I was doing research of my own going back, say, to 2005, 6 and 7 about the Twin Towers and the World Trade Center. And I was watching loads of videos up until 3 a.m. on the internet at night. And there was like interviews with people that were, should we say, like firemen. And they're like, yeah, we heard explosions in the basement. And these videos have been taken down off YouTube. And I'm like, hang on a minute, what on earth is going on here? The implications of this are that someone in America's defense forces are behind actually murdering people on their own soil in broad daylight. And this is broadcast nationally around the world. Like, how can this even be true? How can this be the case? So that opened a can of worms for me that led me to question a lot of things. And whether it's World War I, World War II, the moon landings, the Titanic, you can go back through nearly every major event in world politics and see an alternative narrative to the one that's been presented in the mainstream. So when it came to being told to put on a mask and get a test and get a jab, I'm like, let's just have a think about this now. Something not quite adding up here with this narrative, given the fact that we've got the globalists pushing this agenda for a long time, and they're a problem, reaction, solution. So they're looking for a good crisis where they can introduce all these measures that they've got planned for us. And lo and behold, if there isn't a crisis, then they'll bloody create one because they've got the resources. And you're talking about phenomenally powerful people here that can print money, the likes of the Federal Reserve, in cahoots with the multinational corporations, the military industrial complex via Raytheon and Halliburton and these companies. They can go into any country and bomb the fuck out of innocent women and children like they did with Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Libya, Egypt, the list goes on and on and on, and then present this in the media as introducing democracy and liberating the natives from a tyrannical government, like they lied about with Gaddafi in Libya, who was actually giving free health care and free homes to every one of his citizens. And the likes of Hillary Clinton mocked his death, you know? So when you've been accustomed to that kind of information, you're going to smell a rat about what the public narrative is or what the papers and the news are putting out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, be skeptical. You said it there. I had Mark Comet on my show. He's well known from the British Patriotic Alternative, a key figure. Channel 4 again did another hit piece on him about 20 years ago. You had that Zionist shill, Russell tried to do one on him called a Nazi boy, but he laid it out, and this is the way it is. If you go in, when the Americans and the English go into a place like Iraq, is a good example, they level it, so they absolutely bomb it. They absolutely bomb it there to smithereens. Now, that's a real war, of course. So, but how is that portrayed? How is the information disseminated out to the sheep of people? Well, the television watchers are told that it's a good thing. So they're told. Now, these are people that cannot conceptualize or formalize ideas for themselves. So they're looking at the praying mantis, as I call it. I assign all different appellations. And
hold on a second, right? Is that not disrespectful to people like, say, my mom, my stepdad, my sister? They're ordinary people. They just happen to watch the news. They buy newspapers. They believe the bullshit that comes out of the likes of the BBC, and they accept that. But apart from that, and apart from the fact that they're my family, and they ignored everything I said about getting jabbed, and they went and got jabbed because they believe it was a good idea for themselves, they're still decent people. They'd still have my back.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, even the way you just framed it there, actually, you said, is it disrespectful for people that watch the bullshit? So that's a bit of an oxymoron there. But no, like, it's not. People have to be told really at this stage. Now, what actually happens there is it's very serious, because unfortunately people can be programmed to be useful idiots. And essentially the worst case is actually to be enemy combatants. So people, it's time for niceties and pleasantries. CERTA goes out, they have to be known. Now, how do you make this? Yeah, if it's friends or family, what you say, and what a great philosopher Stefan Molyneux he keeps on mentioning, is that you can only provide people with the truth, verifiable facts. So it's like all these different examples that are verifiable facts, that the TV will show the polar opposite view, will show a lie. And unfortunately, that is very dangerous. That's deleterious for people psychologically, and then indeed physiologically, to be watching this garbage and think that it's actually accurate information. So again, we need to get away from this whole, I'm triggered, or it's they're training the children there also in school in the Marxist indoctrination camps to be sort of triggered and worried and all about this. No, I'm afraid when something it's extremely important. So as a result of you providing this information, you can wake a few people up, and you're doing them a massive favor. So that's what it is. I have family members, of course, also that check in on the Mockingbird media. But that's it. It is the Mockingbird media. It is complete subterfuge. So it's there to lie. It's to deceive people.
Yeah, I get that. Or tell-lie vision, as it was. And if you even go back to the Second World War, or the First World War, where it was all done through the radio, the people they believed that the government had their back, or that local councils had their back. And everyone where I grew up in England was reared to be led to believe that the institutions, like the media, like the government, like local government, were created as part of the welfare state with the public's best interests in mind. But I wasn't long in figuring out for myself, I'd say sometime between the age of 16 and 21, that this absolutely wasn't the case. These institutions weren't serving me in any way, shape or form. But rather than take my views on board, and, I love them to bits, my sister and my mum, but rather than take my views on board, they just think that I was a bit of a fucking lunatic, or that I was a conspiracy nut, or that, I'd gone too much into something, and they wouldn't really understand that I'd done over a decade of research, and that I had quite an insight into why there was good reasons not to watch the television. And there was a famous doctor online, I'm struggling to remember his name, last year came up with the term mass formation psychosis.
Matthias Desmet, he's from Belgium. Matthias Desmet. Mass formation psychosis.
So there's literally a frequency that's emitted from the television that's hypnotizing people.
Yeah. Well,
and this is a psychological fact. This is not an accident. This is why they do it and how they do it. And in the 60s and the 70s, a lot of famous experiments were run by the behavioral psychologists like B.F. Skinner and his proteges. And, they described it as the science of pulling habits out of rats, as opposed to rabbits out of hats. But never mind. You're meant to laugh there, but not to worry.
Yeah. Sorry, there's just a little bit of a lag. I got it there, actually.
No, so it's like you've got these behavioral psychologists in these non-governmental organizations designing policy for what's ultimately ending up in the curriculum that our children are being taught in the schools. This is fucked up on so many levels. It's unbelievable. But again, how do you end up not sounding like a crazy conspiracy nut to your family when they're all watching telly, they all watch the news, and they all buy into this on a day-to-day basis, that the government's got their best interests at heart, and that the evil Russian hackers are responsible for the election fraud in the US or some shit like this, you know? It's remarkable, actually, that so many of us have still been able to maintain positive mental health despite being in the minority, and despite trying to wake up the other people around us that maybe have started to question things when things obviously don't add up. You know, the guys that were saying trust the science and got jabbed twice and 3 times, surely they're in some way waking up and going, hang on a minute, we've been lied to, we've been deceived, we've been fooled.
Yeah, you touch on a very important point there, Carl. I'd just like to focus in on that, absolutely. What happens there is that antecedent events become irrelevant. So you can take it that 2 individuals at loggerheads, one is maybe a television watcher, the other is researching from excellent content creators, to give an example. Now, what actually happens is that when something materializes, I spoke with the wonderful John Waters, who I have on my show now already 9 times, but I gave the example off the top of my head as if someone is basically reading an example of a racing post inside the bookies. And the Racing Post said, okay, Ashley's hero is going to come in at Northampton on the 2:45 race. And you say, no, it hasn't got a chance. And they say, look, you're only a conspiracy theorist, it's on this. But you're actually providing. Now, what happens is this happens and it keeps on happening. But so the person actually doesn't take ownership or accountability for the fact that, you know, they're wrong, but also people are being trained, you see, to be sort of NPCs. I mentioned earlier how people don't conceptualize or formalize ideas for themselves. They get it through the brain rot box. Now, the CIA have a strategy here. It's called rolling thunder. So what actually happens is that whether it's Spoof 19 or LGBTYRSQ degeneracy, whether it's drag queens going into schools, or whatever. What happens is that the victim is constantly moved on to the next so-called conspiracy. So what happens is you say, now wait a minute, didn't I tell you that this would transpire? And you said it didn't, and you quoted some so-called boffin off the television, an expert, as they say, and that was a lie. They're already thinking in their heads, because what do you think about this latest thing? You see, they're constantly, it's rolling thunder. Psychologically, they're moving on. So antecedent events become irrelevant.
If I said to you, would that be cognitive dissonance, or is that more like the Hegelian dialectic?
Well, actually, yeah, it's something onto cognitive dissonance, but just to explain that, really, that's like double things. So it's holding 2 contrasting ideas in your head simultaneously. That is a massive aspect of what's taking place, yeah? And then they have to actually focus in on what was right and what was wrong. But they are, absolutely, yeah. Cognitive dissonance it's a huge issue. So what happens is, say, for instance, face nappies or injections. They say, okay, it's 2 weeks to flatten the curve. This is how this all started. Then it was another 2 weeks, another 2 weeks. Then it was testing the way out of it. Now, individuals like myself and yourself, we were quite, prescient or prophetic on this, and not because that we made up the data ourselves. We were actually looking to what the experts were saying. They were going to do rolling lockdowns, and they were going to be continually injecting in pharmacological transmutation intravenously into people's bloodstream. So that's what they were wanting to do. But they were told that, but still, what happens? So it's just one more, another few weeks, and it went on and on and on. And it gets to the certain state then. So what happens then at the end of it when the potato with a wig over in England announces that everything, now bear in mind at the time, the so-called experts here, we had Dr. Death, Tony Hula Hoops. He closed down the country for another lockdown because he was concerned. He was concerned over 47 cases. But in actual fact, when everything opened up, there was nearly 20,000 cases. But you mentioned that to someone, and what did they do at that stage then, Carl? This is miraculous how I found this out. I went to mention they don't want to talk about Spoof 19 anymore, because guess what they have to talk about? Putin is bad, and Zelensky's a wonderful individual. They're already moved on to it because the television has told them to.
It's remarkable to see how people are so easily programmed.
Yeah.
So coming back to the phenomenon of cognitive dissonance, right? I would describe that, again, for the benefit of anyone watching that's not 100% sure, and even for ourselves, right? The whole phenomenon of cognitive dissonance might be where you hold the opinion that the government is out there full of elected representatives who are taking part in a parliamentary democracy, and you go along and you vote for them, and they do their best for you, and they represent you and the other constituents, and they lobby on your behalf. But then you see that they maybe have decided to invade Iraq, and then there's hundreds of thousands of people marching on the street, and they're all saying, no, we don't want this. We didn't vote for this in any way, shape or form. And then they put out, well, this guy's got weapons of mass destruction. We know because we sold them to him, but don't talk too much about that. And so we're going to go in and we've got to have him removed in order to preserve democracy for those poor people over there. And you're confronted with, all right, well, either I believe that my government is right and the media is right, or they're lying, and all the people marching on the streets, if they were actually had any impact or if voting made any difference, then there would be action and behavior from the government in accordance with the will of the people. So these conflicting views can't hold, right? Either the government is doing the will of the people or the media is lying.
Yeah, or they're acting on behalf of the globalists. Yeah, and this is all just a plan.
So if it's too difficult for you to then assess your previous belief and adopt a new belief, because that might mean rethinking your whole world, because all of your assumptions, all of your beliefs about schools, about education, about universities, about newspapers, about media, if you have to rethink everything because there's a whole house of cards that's then exposed to your critical thinking faculty, that might be perceived as too much energy for you. So you're afraid to confront dealing with that. So you just shut down anyone that has a dissenting voice in your opinion, and you close them down and you say, no, that can't be right. Yeah, 9/11. Oh, it was the Muslims. They found the passports in at the floor where everything was blown up just miraculously, and that this is true, and we're going to believe the media because otherwise the consequences of having to disbelieve what's being put out mean I have to rethink my whole life. Yes, and that's too much work. And that's cognitive dissonance, right? The Hegelian dialectic. Hegel was a German philosopher around the 17th, 18th century, right? And what he came up with is what you described, where you hold two opposing opinions at the same time. So you might have the opinion, I'm open-minded, right? If somebody wants to be gay, trans, whatever, that's fine. You do you, I'll do me. You get on with your business, I'll get on with mine. Then I've got a daughter that comes home from school calling me homophobic or calling me racist because of what she's been programmed with in the school teachings. And I'm like, hold on a second. These so call it globalists, if you like, that are behind the curriculum that's being pushed into our schools via these foundations like the Bill and Melinda Gates foundations or whatever mechanisms they can use. They've got information that's being presented to my daughter as being progressive, open-minded, but it's not. It's very insidiously targeted at engendering them with a sense of a very fixed belief about something. But yet it's being represented as being open-minded. So you've got all these kids being targeted thinking it's cool to be gay, right? Or, all right, it's not that there's anything wrong. If you're a man trapped in a woman's body or a woman trapped in a man's body, of which there's a percentage of people that I've met that are like that, then, they're free to engage in procedures or whatever and live their lives according to what they believe they should do. I respect that. That's their sovereignty, right? But when you've got 20 to 30% of kids in every classroom wanting to change genders, there's something absolutely wrong with the policy. And it's as if someone's deliberately looking to subvert anything that's innocent or good or pure. and that's a satanic agenda, and that's
well,
what's been
exactly
coming
what it
out.
is,
Yeah. So
it's exactly what it is. And just pushing that, this all really falls in under the brackets of propaganda. So how does it really work? So in propaganda, how it works really is it's monomaniacal. So whether it's the LGBT, whether it's the Spook 19, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, so they focus in on a certain narrative, okay? And then they also, what they do is they bring it down to the lowest basic level. I mean bog standard, so everybody can get it. Yeah, absolutely. Repeat. So they use tautology is used, psychological fractionation is used to drum that into their heads. But also, you see, it's made out. You have to have a bad guy as well. So they make it melodramatic. So say, for instance, if it's face nappies, they say someone that wears it is true and virtuous. Someone that refuses to wear it, okay, is a far-right racist neo-Nazi. So that's
public health for just breathing. Yeah,
they're not saving lives, and that's how they make it appealing. Now, also in the schools, what they've really brought in is it's their Marxist indoctrination camps. I say this was one real use. You could call it cultural Marxism. You could also call it cultural nihilism. They make it that they believe in nothing. They grind them down. They're deconstructed. Okay, but now they're made to gravitate towards victimhood. That actually they see victimhood as appealing. Instead of standing up for yourselves and being strength and have resolve, they turn it out that a victim, if you're weak and down. So if they want to talk about depression, they want to talk about suicide. Now they're introducing pornography, degeneracy, and they want them talking on that because these are all, they want them ground down and suicide.
Sorry to cut into you. Is it any coincidence that nearly every soap opera that I would have seen in the 90s and the noughties, like I'm from Manchester, I brought up on a diet of Coronation Street and cheese on toast, like, you know, and Coronation Street was like a religion, but then you had EastEnders and Crossroads and Emmerdale Farm, and some people would just go from one to the next, and just the whole evening would be filled with soap operas, where that very narrative, where there's a victim, where somebody's like gaslighting is happening by the government on the people via the media, and it's like presented as drama or controversy, or it like the very essence of the subversion is ideally presenting anything that's a lie as the truth. And this Orwellian sort of last couple of years that we've seen, it's actually hard to believe that they've been able to get away with it as much as they have, because it's like a science fiction movie. It's like we're in some kind of fucked up dystopian kind of. You saw that movie, was it V for Vendetta? Yeah. And it's like, it's meant to be fiction, man. This isn't meant to be what's happening, you know. And it's like, how can so many people be anytime I went into Tesco or anytime I went into Aldi or Lidl or any of them, right? 99% of the people in there are wearing masks, and I'm just walking around and I can see, because I'm a psychologist, I observe behavior. I can see people looking at me, and I might give them a cursory glance for half a second and then just carry on about my own business, right? But the whole non-verbal behavior had to change to avoid conflict with people that would be outraged that you'd just be breathing air and not wearing, as you call, the face nappies. But
they're trying to be status. Their status as well. That's getting back to our earlier point as well, that they have to be good. They have to be a method that are going to protect us. And they were sold this idea of communitarianism. You see, they want them to be good little communitarians, to think to themselves, to forget about their own bodily sovereignty, their own personal integrity, essentially, that all that should be given up because the government told them, and it's for the greater good. Very insidious, very insidious. They threw out these troops.
Part of that has been also removing national identity and regional identity. If you take, say, England as an example, because that's what I was familiar growing up, the people in Newcastle have virtually zero cultural in common with the people in Cornwall. The people in Cornwall are in a rural community that's more like Wales or Ireland, right? Yet through geography, they're linked in the same. So you could take any country like the Ukraine, or even in Ireland, even Cork, West Cork, and East Cork, and North Cork. They're all culturally different, right?
Yeah.
They might be in the same location. So these ideas of regional identity have all been diluted by the deliberate influx of either foreign nationals, refugees, or what have you. Because the last thing the globalists want is people standing up with a strong sense of identity.
Yes.
It's all been polluted and diluted. I'm not against mixed marriages. If a black guy falls in love with a white girl, or a white guy falls in love with a black girl, happy days, work away. You do me, you do you, I'll do me, and we all get on with life, right? You mind your own business, you get on. But when you see that it's a very deliberate strategy, and whether you put it down to the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, or the likes of the Phoenicians, the Medici, who are the Zionists, whoever's responsible or whoever's behind this attack on humanity and sovereignty, you can see the more you look into it that it actually goes back way further than you could ever imagine. And again, it means you have to unthink everything you've believed, or everything you were taught, or everything you thought you knew.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're going back, you're talking about eugenics, of course, and where are all these Malthusian policies coming out of? A lot of people don't realize, but roughly 100 years ago, in America, they sterilized people, right? Now, it was the Rockefellers behind it. They sterilized them. But this was the so-called trust the science is settled. The reason what they did is they said feeble-minded. That's what it was actually. So it doesn't sound too scientific, does it? They said that people were feeble-minded. How did they ascertain whether they were? Well, they just got doctors. Again, these venal and corrupt boffins would sign off and say such and such. The Ashley family, or Miriam Ashley, they don't want her having kids, and they just sterilize them. People don't actually realize that. You'd say that to a lot of people, and they call you a conspiracy theorist. But you will say these Malthusian policies, eugenics has been around for a long time. I just want to reverse back, and the fact that you said Manchester, now, lovely spot, great culture, into music, and you were mentioning a few shows from there. Now, we're talking about Popsy Coronation Street, which it's a lot better than EastEnders anyway, because that EastEnders, there's a constant black cloud over Albert Square. Yeah, Coronation Street is fairly watchable. But one of my favourite shows ever, without a doubt, came out of Manchester, and it is, of course, the royal family. I mean, Caroline Aherne, you've got Ricky Tomlinson playing Jim Royal in the royal family with his famous line, "My ass." And I can tell you that with this spoof 19, Jim Royal would have saw through this from the very start. My ass.
What was his wife called?
So the mother was Norma, Jeannie, and then, what's Barbara.
Put the kettle on, Barbara, love.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and when I see it, it's a little bit reminiscent, I'm sure, of. Yeah.
I thought the fact that this was a comedy after about the second or third episode, because nobody had a fucking clue. They thought it was actually a documentary, and they'd all sit down in front of Antiques Roadshow and take bets on what stuff was worth. I'm sitting there with my ex-wife watching this, and I'm like, this is taking the piss. This is a comedy. This is actually brilliant and hilarious. And they're all sat there like, nah, man, it's actually documentary. And I'm like, no. Then, everyone obviously knew it was a comedy, you know. But the first half a dozen episodes, you couldn't tell. It was so good that you couldn't discern between it being a comedy or a documentary. And this is how I think there was another one with a very good actor in it, who was playing like a junkie and a drug addict and a father. What was that called now? Oh,
it's funny you say, because I can remember the first episode of the Royal Family, and it was the phone. It was the phone list, and it was like, who's calling? Was someone calling Glasgow? Who's calling? And Lurchio. And he's, you know, he treats his son. He's always got these derogatory, Lurch and Lurky. derogatory say appellations that he assigns to him, but they're having a laugh. And you have Carolina Hearn then, and she's incredibly manipulative, but a brilliant character. And of course, the boyfriend, it's just absolutely magnificent. Now, it's a drama, a lot of emotion, but amazing acting. And as I said, the fact that you mentioned Manchester, there was no way if you're mentioned with TV. And we are not going to mention that, because I love that show. I love that. And I even confess that when the grandmother, it was called, I think, Queen of Sheba, when the grandmother passed away, the acting on it was so incredible that I had to fight. I think there was a little bit of water there developing there in the eyes. It was amazing. But I'd like to say, finishing up, it's very funny and everything, but the acting in that is absolutely outstanding for me. It's outstanding.
Caroline was brilliant. She was gorgeous and funny, but sadly had self-esteem issues.
Yeah, she had a demon. She turned into, unfortunately, an alcoholic, and she used to also smoke. She was a chain smoker. She was with someone, I think, was she? The Chemical Brothers. It was one of those. I think she had this tumultuous relationship there. But they showed, they showed her, unfortunately, out a few times, and the sweat in the face and everything, and probably a few amphetamines. So she had her demons, and but yeah, very funny lady, one of the greats. I have herself, and I would put her sort of Bernard Manning. She'd be a female counterpart of a Bernard Manning style.
Oh, he was great. He was represented as. Sorry, before I go on, it was Frank Gallagher in Shameless was who I was thinking of there. That is the greatest show to come out of Manchester, without a doubt. Just ahead of the royal family. But Bernard Manning was represented as being a misogynist, a racist, you name it. He said, hang on, whether you're a black or a Jew or a woman, fat, thin, gay, straight, old, young, rich, poor, I'll fucking insult all of you and take the mickey out of all of you. So I'm not any of those things you're calling me. And he had a heart of gold. He used to donate all his money to charity behind the scenes, and nobody knew that about him, Yeah. And I look back at some of the videos where he was on public television in the 80s, and even the people on the show, they were almost looking to mock him or to make him look like a caricature of himself. But he just used to make everyone laugh wherever he went. And to think of how his jokes would go down today in the modern context of nanny state and what's PR, I don't think any of our children or the younger generation would appreciate Bernard at all.
Well, I would hope, thankfully, it's not all. Unfortunately, it is the vox populi brainwashed into this woke culture and to be overly sensitive. But I think there still are people, yes, they'd be in a minority that would appreciate it. But Comedy Gold, you said, they tried to bring all the virtue signalers, tried to pull him out. But Bernard was well able to stand his ground. Unfortunately, sometimes, they were grouping around him. But you could see him, he had heart of gold. He used to insult the Irish nearly more than most. I mean, one of his jokes was, he goes, this Irish guy gets a job on a building site, and they ask him, what's your name? Paddy Mulligan. Spell it. Stick the job up your ass. So they were having a go, but he even showed in his audience that he'd come in. He was slagging Pakis the whole time. Pakistani guys used to actually come in. So who is there, some gimp from the British Brainwashing Corporation, the BBC, or a new version of that? BBC is blokes bumming children.
Coming back to behavioral psychologists, right? These are the maybe either soulless or unempathetic or humorless nerds that are guiding the NGOs behind public policy that say, oh, hang on, you can't call it a blackboard because it could insult black people. Black people are like, we don't give a fuck what you call a blackboard, right? If they've got any brains whatsoever. So what we're going to do is we're going to call it a chalkboard or a whiteboard or whatever else. And this is happening all the time where modern culture is emerging and evolving. The stand-up comedians are really the truthers, the ones that are coming out and telling it like it is. There's been some great ones over the years, but we digress. And I'm going to come back into, if I may, a quick fire round with you.
Yeah, okay.
Have you ever written a book?
No.
Have you ever jumped out of a plane?
No.
Have you ever cheated death?
Yes, several times.
Have you children?
No kids that I know of.
Have you ever eaten an insect?
By accident, I've swallowed. I was only actually just mentioned earlier to someone. When I was a kid, I was down in Ballybunion, and I swallowed a blue bottle. And I was really concerned. I was like, oh my God. And my mom just said, oh no, that's protein. And then I instantly felt fine. It was protein. Protein will give me muscle. So there you go.
I'd be worried about it laying eggs inside of me and giving birth to maggots and stuff, you know.
It didn't last long. It went back to hatch, and that was it.
It's amazing what we were told when we were kids that we believed. I think chewing gum, my mum said if I ate chewing gum, then it'd stick inside of me or something. So I got phenomenally anti-chewing gum, or I stopped eating it. Or what was the other thing? If you do that with your eyes and cross your eyes, if you do that, then they'll stay like...
Yeah, turn them inside, and the wind blows, they'll stay that way. Oh, yeah.
You believe it because it was your mum, right?
Yeah.
So come here. Have you ever walked on hot coals?
Well, I tell you, I can remember I was in Marseille when I was 13 years of age, and they had a beach there, but it was a really stony beach, and we were quite close to it. And one day was seriously hot. I mean, oppressive hot down in the south of France. I'd say it was around 40 degrees. Basically, the rats here in Ireland in the reptilian treacherous echo chamber would be saying that the experts think that 250,000 people are going to die if weather was actually this hot. And I had my sandals, and I remember I was walking down to a bar there on the beach to get like an orange, and it was basically on fire. So that's as close to hot coals with temperature.
Have you ever driven a Ferrari?
No, I'll tell you, the closest thing I have driven was the fastest car. Now, I'm not that much into cars. I've driven a Porsche before in around South Dublin. Let's just say I wasn't insured in it, but it was a former boss that I had, and he was not too happy about me driving it after he found out either. But one of the best cars I've driven, sports cars, was over in Australia. Now, I keep on, it was the fastest road car in the world at the time. Do you know, actually, on the Champions League, sometimes it's sponsored by Honda, and they show on the ad break, they have the engine of a plane, the propeller, and then they have this car that was there. Now, this was for years they had this car. So it's a type of Honda sports car. It's got no back seats in it. The actual engine is in the boot of this thing. It is an absolute animal. And at the time, it could do, was it 198 miles per hour or something? And that was officially, as a road car, that you could get insured on, the fastest in the world. So forget about your Ferrari. I drove this. And when I put my boot down on the accelerator, it nearly gave myself and the chap in the passenger seat whiplash. That's how fast this baby was.
Cool. Have you ever ridden a horse?
I would have when I was younger in my cousin's house in County Limerick.
These are yes/no questions, by the way.
Yeah, man, you're asking. I'm a loquacious Irishman, actually, borderline garrilous. So the answer is yes on that.
Loquacious, borderline garrilous. Have you ever been abducted by aliens?
No, not maybe in my dreams, but no, I haven't. The answer is no.
And finally, for this section, what was your best holiday or your best trip abroad, and why?
Oh, that's a massive one. This is what?
You mentioned Australia there with the Honda.
Well, no, that was like more work. Let's say holiday. I've been over to Ibiza a few times. That was pretty amazing. Over to Amsterdam, it's usually to follow. Oh, best holiday ever. I am going to say, look, let's throw it down as a golf holiday. I went off to Spain there before in Alicante. It was a short space of time, and we golfed every single day, and we drank like fishes at night time. So let's lock it in for the bit of Española and Alicante.
What part of Spain was that?
Alicante.
So East Coast. Yeah, that's near Benidorm, is it?
It's near Benidorm, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, nice beach in Benidorm. I was there before. So in terms of your favourite books, what books would you have read that would have changed your life, or would you recommend for anybody watching, any of the viewers? We have a little section on recommended books. So you needn't limit it to one. Have you 2 or 3 books that you'd recommend?
Do you know what? I finished about a month ago, Frederick Forsyth's Day of the Jackal. Now, that is just absolutely amazing. I've watched the movie prior to that. It's an amazing movie. Not the one with Bruce Willis now. It's the one from the early 70s. It's absolutely
not the one with Bruce Forsyth, but go on.
Yeah, no, with Willis in it. So I can remember the first book I ever read, and my dad gave me £2 it was at the time. He said if I wrote a brief synopsis about it, and I did, and really enjoyed it, and it was John Grisham's The Client. So that was my first book really, that besides, I would have read a few sports biographies before then, dipping into it with soccer players, because I was mad into soccer. But really, as a fiction book. Now, other books. Okay, listen, we got to mention George Orwell's 1984 there. With the old Ministry of Truth.
How did you think the movie stacked up compared to the book?
Do you know, I haven't actually watched all of it fully, bar a lot of... I know John Hurt was in it, wasn't he?
The acting was fairly low-key. The budget must have been fairly small. And after I'd read the book, it wasn't what I was expecting at all. It was very dark and very quiet. I
didn't watch the movie, believe it or not. Yeah, only clips on YouTube. But yeah, it was disappointing, was it?
Just, I guess, like as any young man or any child, I'd say I was in my teens when I first read Animal Farm and 1984. And when you're young, your imagination is so vivacious that you create maybe something more, and then you see a movie and it disappoints. These days, a lot of people watch a movie before they read a book. Or, for example, like the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the films were so fucking well made, you could hardly criticize them, but they were still nothing compared to the book, because my imaginative faculty would have been able to create a world or create something that was not something that a movie could ever live up to, because it's just different dimensions, right?
Also, just want to throw in with the book as well. Recently, what I read is our very own Kevin Myers, and it's his Bank of Green Willows. It's just an outstanding book. Really, sometimes it just really reaches out to the emotions and stirs them around like a whirlwind. And it's like I burned through the book. It's a small little novel, but I just ended up, I burnt up. So I really appreciate that. And of course, he's an individual. Actually, how could I not mention my very own, my pal there, John Waters, Give Us Back the Bad Roads. So to people that are checking this out, and it's going to be loaded up onto YouTube, and as I said, I'm going to make a link onto my community. John Waters, Give Us Back the Bad Roads, and it's absolutely exceptional. It's very well written. It's written to his father, but he's covering the attack of cultural Marxism, and it will sort of make people better, versed in understanding what's actually taking place at the moment now, and it's a very educational book.
So I've come across the name John Waters, and you mentioned you'd interviewed him on your own YouTube channel a few times. Who is he? And for the benefit of the viewers that don't know, why would they be recommended to pick up his book, Give Us Back the Bad Roads?
Well, he's a columnist, a journalist, a songwriter. He has 10 books. He's an intellectual. Let's say here in Ireland, if you reverse back the clock there 20 years ago, he would have been writing for the Irish Times. It would have been semi-reputable back then. It's a rag now. It's run by treacherous scum like Fintan Toolbag. But so you would have been reading, John would have been writing a piece about current affairs on, we'll say, a broadsheet. And you would have looked up on RT, and it might have been, say, a Friday night, he could have been on the Late Late Show with Gay Byrne, with Pat the Rat Kenny, but he was a real household name. So he's an intellectual. He would have been through the children's courts. He's quite famous for that, for giving advice and seeing how corrupt the courts were. He's been active. He's a constitutionalist and a civilizationalist. So that'd be John Waters. So if people are unsure, they don't know.
I like that word. I got a copy of, and you'll have to forgive my pronunciation because I know I can't speak Irish very well, the Bunreacht na HÉireann. And I read through
the Irish Constitution. Yeah.
I read through some of the principles, and I studied a bit on Brehon law as well, and going back to Ireland's ancient system of laws, which the people pretty much observed and respected. And the Constitution, like the concepts of a republic, or even just any place where the people run things for the benefit of the people, including the freedom of speech, freedom of travel, freedom of assembly. These are all things that have been under attack as part of this genocidal policy by the globalists through the media on the people, through the gaslighting, through the behavioral psychologists, through the control of the media. And it's really very actually fucking simple. When you look at the Constitution, that the Parliament is meant to be elected by the people to serve the will of the people. And when you see that that's not happening virtually everywhere, it's easy to get cynical and disappointed. The illusion of democracy, as I call it, they have little sort of, red, blue, green, and different colours for the different sort of horses. And it's all just a distraction of an illusion. Nothing changes. The same power brokers behind the scenes are still calling the shots. But is there a reason for optimism that in Ireland we'll get rid of the reptiles and the scutters that are self-serving and serving this satanic agenda, and it will be replaced with a genuinely constitutional republic that respects the rights and the sovereignty of the people in that republic according to the welfare state? So if you're sick or you're ill or you're infirm, you benefit from the pot that you paid into when you were able-bodied. I mean, this is enshrined in the Constitution, that we look after our own, right? And these values are being eroded. Family values are being eroded. Community values are being eroded. Surely we're going to end up going back to, if not the bow and arrow, then something in accordance with our sovereign constitutional rights.
Yeah, well, you said it there, Carl, exactly what it is. It's an attack on the family. It's an attack on traditionalism here in Ireland. It doesn't really look like it yet. I think things have to get a lot worse. And that's because people still have the luxury of running away from the truth. We can see that. We mentioned cognitive dissonance. That's actually a luxury to have, because people can still go into a house where there's electricity. They can put food on their belly. They can watch their non-slicks. They can take out their brain rot box and go onto their socialist media and virtue signal about some garbage that's out there. They can still do that. So things are going to have to get worse. And I see that the whole infrastructure, political infrastructure here, there's not going to be a political a solution to our problems, but it is a cancer now. It truly is a malignant tumor. And what we need is what John Locke was a proponent of, and I would also absolutely agree, is a tabula rasa. We need a clean slate, because it's cancerous to the core, and that's it. And it's full of dirty rats. So
the concept of a functioning republic, whether you look at America or Ireland or anywhere else, even Iran as a functioning Islamic republic, right? There's obviously going to be places where there is a better quality of life than others. And I'm one of the few people that moved from England to Ireland for that. I wanted a better quality of life in a place to raise my children. And everyone around me thought I was nuts, because they thought Manchester was a better quality of life. And there were certain attractions and things about Manchester that would have met with a young man's desires, and Leeds as well. Fucking great place, I'd still be there if I hadn't left. But the west of Ireland gave me a quality of life that I couldn't have had where I was. And I go back now, and sadly, it reminds me why I left. When you go from one town to another, grotty towns where a cash converter's replaced a family business, And you see how the impact of these retail parks that were created in the 90s, where they drove people out of the towns into these retail parks where they could do their shopping in one place, book a holiday, get car insurance, buy clothes, get photographs developed, and then do the weekly food shop all in the same place. I mean, it made sense to do that from a consumerist point of view, but it was the death knell for a lot of family businesses. And you see a lot of the towns in Ireland, or the rural villages in Ireland, where there was this community spirit, and it's been eroded by the same drive for retail parks, pushing things into the towns, removing family businesses. I saw an interesting thing where it said, you know, to support local businesses at Christmas time and to shop local and to buy local. And I thought, yeah, that's a well-meaning sentiment. But then there was a comment underneath it by a woman who said, actually, no, the likes of Aldi and Lidl didn't force me to wear a mask. And I was able to go around shopping freely there. I would love to give my business to the local businesses, but they were the ones that were anal about you wearing masks and trying to enforce this crazy policy on us. So if there's no truth in rural Ireland, if there's no authenticity coming from the majority of people, if it's still a minority of people that you'd call woke, which isn't really a term I like, but if there's only a small minority of people that are aware and awake as to what's actually going on, how can we return to community values if there isn't sufficient people exercising authenticity and honesty with themselves?
Well, a synonym of woke is communism. Every time you hear woke, just think communism. I support that lady, and I would actually agree with her. If she has gone into a local shop and they were unfortunately stupid enough to disregard her bodily autonomy, her personal sovereignty, her personal sovereignty, I should say, excuse me, then absolutely go into your Lidl or Aldi, where you're treated actually a lot better. Now, that's not the case always, but if that is the case, people will have to learn, unfortunately, that they were programmed to be self-destructive. I did find that in a lot of these small businesses, they thought they were jumping on board, and this is how they were trained to be statists. Oh, the government is looking after me. They are your enemy. They were locking you down, you morons. So for those people, that's the way it is. It's Darwinian in a way. What happens is a lot of those businesses are going to fail. I'm going to give you an example, say, of that. I was with my then girlfriend, so my ex-girlfriend, that was inside Limerick, and there was a demonstration on. And I popped into this pub that has only been managed. This gentleman doesn't even own it. I used to play golf with him a few times, right? So, and the inside of the pub wasn't... What's that?
Are you allowed to name and shame?
Well, I just wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. I don't see the value of it. I wouldn't do something like that.
Okay, go on.
Yes, actually, because what this involves is me looking this gentleman in the eye and telling him exactly how I feel, and that's the way to do it. Not sort of going online or anything like that. Some people might do that, but anyway, the point is, so I popped in, and it was when you actually couldn't even. It was only a beer garden place. A beer garden, could you imagine, right? So we walked in, and you could only walk in again to use the toilet, because of course Spoof 19 won't get you if you're going upstairs to urinate after drinking a pint of electric lemonade. So I went in there to get a pint, and it was I think it was at the time, what do you call that? Anyway, it's not that relevant, but the drink is Prosecco. I remember it was a Rob, one of these little 200 milliliter bottles. I think it was something like $7.95. Well, anyway, I won't forget that. But I walked in anyway to use the toilet, and then he came out to me and he said, he'd known me as Carl. So he said, Carl, geez, when you're going inside there to use the toilet, and we were actually only having one, by the way, so at the time. So I said, no, I wouldn't be wearing a nappy. And, he came back and he said, oh, it's not even me, he said. It's that the others will complain. Well, I said, it doesn't matter, those other people, because it's none of their damn business, I'm actually exempt from wearing a face nappy. And we sort of left it at that, but you could see that he felt a little bit aggrieved. Now, what was driving him? What business was it of his? I can understand if you go into a business or into a pub and someone says, look, can you wear a mask or something like that? And then you just say you're exempt. But so anyway, Yes, the same thing. But look, long story short, really with that, I didn't like the treatment anyway there, and I just let him know. And then he came back, again, then to sort of say that, oh, you really have to. And then basically, I just cut him off. The conversation got truncated like that because I'm not here to debate. I'm not asking someone, I'm telling them that I don't wear a face nappy. It's as simple as that. So we were finished and that was fine. And I saw him maybe about 3 months later in Limerick. And he said, oh, man, what's the crack? How are you getting on? I haven't seen you there in a while. And I said, that's right, you haven't. He goes, sure, pop in there later on. And he was telling me that he played a golf course recently. I said, well, listen, I actually won't because I didn't like you enforcing any of the government's Nazi rules or regulations. You didn't have to do any of that rubbish. It's fine if you're going to ask someone, but you were just on board and you were unfortunately doing the government's bidding there, and which is completely unacceptable. And I will not be going into that pub anytime soon, as long as you're managing it. And it was really like that, non-confrontational sort of way. I just left it at that, and he knew. He knew. He was sort of like, oh, I'm a bit sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry too, I said, that I feel that way. But this is it. I never forget. It's all stored in the hard drive. And I suggest to other people, if you've been mistreated through this by these scared ninnies, because never leave yourself be controlled by fear or cowardice. Our stupidity is really another one. So it's all stored in the hard drive. And as long as he's there, I will not be frequenting the place.
Yeah, we've had a similar policy ourselves of going back to the places now that served us back then and giving them the business. Yes. Respect for the fact that there was a few places where we could go where we weren't harassed. You made me think of a point there with my teenage daughter, and you see what's motivating them is conformity. That old Japanese saying that the nail that sticks out the furthest is the one that gets hammered first. Bang. They don't want to be that nail. And curiously, later on in life, when they step into authenticity and become who they are unashamedly without really giving a shit what other people think, they'll express their individuality and know that that's an essential core part of their own personal development.
I agree.
Teenagehood, it's almost like who can suppress it or repress it the most in order to be conformist. And this is the reason why you have a country full of Man United and Liverpool supporters, where as coming here as a Man City man, it was like being the only gay in the village. You were almost laughed at. And it's like you might get a few Leeds or a few Villa or a few Arsenal supporters because they had a few good Irish players down over the years, like Liam Brady. Who was the fella for the Leeds in the 70s?
John Giles.
Thank you. But the vast majority were all United and Liverpool here, so I was very much ostracised anyway.
Carl, you found out that a lot of people are bandwagon supporters, the grandstanders. So what actually happened when Man City won the Premiership? Then you had a lot of Paddies and Oisins going out there, and they're putting on that, and suddenly.
They still don't like us. They still don't like us. And it's like after a decade of unprecedented success, after 35 years of long-term suffering, I would liken nearly any Manchester City supporter to having a psychological disorder simply through the 30-odd years of mismanagement, promotion, relegation, depression, alcoholism. We're never too far away. And there's a lot of City supporters like that. It's not even a joke.
They're kneeling down now and they've got child grooming flags on their arms. So soccer is dog shit, really. It's a good game, but it's just cancerous to the core. So I wouldn't follow it. I wouldn't support it.
Sure.
I would tell those people, don't be buying the season tickets, don't be buying any television packages for all that nonsense, because they don't represent the people. You can see that they start booing, but they still kneel down. And it's the same as a government. It's a fait accompli system. They're just the globalists behind it. These corporations are going to say, we're going to get the players to bitch out and kneel down for a Marxist terrorist group, BLM, and get them to put child grooming flags on their arms. Virtually 99% of the people don't want it to happen, but yet it still happens. So what you do is cancel those TV packages, cancel your season tickets, And that's it. Don't watch any of that. Don't follow it, because once it turns cancerous, it has to be knocked out. The link has to be attenuated with it.
But it's not just that. It's then the players that turn around and say, well, I'm not bending down, or I'm not wearing a poppy. They get ostracized and vilified for just standing their ground.
There's not nearly enough of them.
Of a player, he was from Derry. And he said, I ain't wearing a fucking poppy. He played for West Brom. James,
I know him. I can see him. Yeah, he's such a reddish, blondie hair covered in tattoo. James McLean, is that?
Thank you. Yeah. And I think he played for Sunderland as well as West Brom. And he was a decent enough player. He wasn't a world beater. But he said, no, I'm not wearing a poppy, because to me it symbolises imperialism, oppression, the presence of British troops in my homeland, where they came into people's homes, snipers on the roof, tanks in the street, in my home village. I mean, that's just absolutely nuts. And he was vilified in the British media for not wearing a poppy and not, becoming sympathetic towards the people that had died in the war. And the way they spun it out, poor James McLean was lucky he ever got a game of football anywhere again, just for standing his ground and expressing his own opinion.
Yeah, well, that's it. You said vilified, absolutely, because if you're not going around with the narrative, they're trying to make sure that they're all conformists. But that's that. I mean, it's rare enough. Unfortunately, if you see all the England team anyway, actually the Irish team as well, were kneeling down, and they did it against Hungary, and it was brilliant. The English, didn't they get beaten by Hungary? And then you have that shit-eating Gareth Southgate came out, and he was allowed to, after losing the match, came out and said, there was racial abuse in the crowd. See this sort of shit? Now, if you had any level of journalists, if you didn't have prostitutes and journalists, some would say, don't worry about all of that political nonsense. You're a football manager and you lost the bloody match. Talk about that. But they're allowed to sex it. In actual fact, the Irish manager did the same thing, this Kenny little rat. And that's, it's self-preservation. So they come out to virtue signal when it's convenient. But look, enough about that nonsense anyway. I wouldn't dream about watching a soccer match now, but kneeling down with child grooming flags on their arms. No way.
This phenomenon of virtue signalling, we've seen it manifested in the last couple of years as people wearing masks when they didn't need to, thinking that they were in some way protecting your granny. Has it always been a thing in Irish culture, in society, where, like, I remember in 6 Mile Bridge, you'd see at mass on a Sunday morning, you'd see cars left haphazardly, higgledy-piggledy, in any way, shape or form, causing as much obstruction as possible. But it was perfectly okay because they were going to mass, so they were entitled to leave their car virtually anywhere. And then you'd see the priest after the mass go into the pub, and he'd give the pub guy or the publican all the change, and the publican guy would be giving him all the notes. So the pub guy needed the change to give people change for all the beer, and the priest needed notes because he'd been given all change and it was like between the priest and the publican, they had the whole village sewn up, and it was like the people were just going through the motions. They were either going to church, praying for their sins, which obviously included their parking sins, then going to the pub and getting drunk to forget about that. And this whole thing evolved where I thought, is this virtue signaling? Is it to be seen to be doing these things to get the approval of others? Is it just a lack of authenticity? And it doesn't make it uniquely Irish. Surely this is a phenomenon everywhere where we have the version of us that's us, with the version of us that our family know, and then there's the public version of us out in the world where we cultivate an image, or we create an image that we want people to think we are.
Yeah, well, people are becoming more and more neurotic, and they've got this defensive hive mind. Yes, absolutely. You give an example of rural Ireland. What you'll have is a real herd mentality. So people will generally do the same things. They'll be very conscious of their reputation, and then you have the Jones effect, and they want to keep in really with the neighbours. They go into the church, as you said, they go into the pub then together, and they're just worried they don't really want any conflict, we'll say, with their neighbours. Virtue, that's a perfect environment for virtue signalling then to take place and to accelerate. So if someone has a high social status in the area, it might be the postmaster, and he's got a slave muzzle on, then it's more likely then to filter down quite quickly then in the locality, because you're dealing with an area that has homogeneity and people with high levels of similitudes that are confined in this little microcosm. So absolutely, what you can have is, the behavior modification can take place very quickly from the top down.
Are you a Limerick man originally, and did you watch the All-Ireland final on Sunday?
Oh, listen, would a dog eat meat on Good Friday if you gave it to him? The answer is absolutely yes. It was amazing. I mean, hurling is an amazing spectacle. It really is. It's a serious sport, and it's gone up. It's advanced in its standards, certainly in the last 10 years.
About the performance or the coaching or any of the setup, it's regarded as an amateur's game, but it's very professional for sure.
Yes, I'd have to agree. I would echo those sentiments. You can see the level of, cardio physio. I mean, it's a massive pitch, and they're going at it. And look, you will have 83,000 people packed in like sardines into Croke Park. And of course, they're there for a reason. They're there because it's a fantastic sport to watch. And because I'm actually doing this video from my new adopted county at the moment is Galway, I would like to wish the tribesmen all the best against the Kingdom this weekend in the other code, which is, of course, Gaelic football. Not as good as hurling, but well watched.
I could never, after watching the hurling, I could never get into the Gaelic football. It was like watching paint dry in comparison, and very slow and almost pedestrian. But I would have loved to have played it. And with the performance of Limerick last Sunday, I loved the fact that Kilkenny hung in there, and they threatened to almost do it. But anytime they needed to step it up a level, Limerick had the pace, the power, the aggression, and the stamina to perform. And even though there was individual performances, the team performance was what got them over the line. They weren't letting that one go. The 3 in a row, and I live next to Galway here, with John Kiley's home turf. It was phenomenal. And like going back to my banter days 20 years ago, I would have worked with people from Bruff, Hospital, and a lot of these towns that I would have never heard of, having only been freshly in the country for 5 minutes. And of course, they're on my doorstep these days. And we're not too far from Martin Town's stud and the helicopters and horses of JP McManus himself. Well, come here. My team, Clare, were the ones that came the closest to sticking it to Limerick this time around. But Clare didn't have the consistency to beat the other runners and riders. So Limerick, I don't think, there was nobody else as good as Limerick. The winners, the right winners, won it out in the end. They were the strongest team, and they performed on the day. And even though Clare gave them a good run for their money, Clare couldn't claim to have been hard done by, Yeah,
and their star man, I definitely feel he's the player of the year, and I actually hope he gets it. I mean, what is it? Last year it went to Cian Lynch. I think he deserved it. The year before that was another Limerick guy, was Garrod Hegarty. But for 2022, for me, it is a banner player. It's Tony Kelly. I thought it was extraordinary, a real Roy of the Rovers. And what you had there in the semi-final against Kilkenny was that Tony did not turn up. He was terrible. I'm sure he'd actually admitted himself. He's their man, Roy of the Rovers, and I think it's true that he's their talisman. When he doesn't perform, the team doesn't perform, and they truly did collapse against Kilkenny, and Kilkenny really ran away with it, and the Cats made it look really, they actually made Clare look pedestrian and made themselves look really, which they are a fantastic team. But I was quite disappointed now for Clare, because really after the first half, I knew there was absolutely no way back. It was done and dusted.
Yeah, it was pretty disappointing, all right, because the prospect of a Clare-Limerick final, and Yeah, who knows? Who knows? But no, Limerick were absolutely fantastic and amazing, and well done to them. So we're going to go into a 1 minute quick fire round, and then we'll finish up. And sorry for running over the allocated time. We've clocked up nearly 90 minutes at this stage, which is a bit more than usual, and it's flowed very quickly. It doesn't feel like it's been that long at all.
Is it?
Pizza or Chinese?
Chinese.
Blonde or brunette?
Go blonde.
Hurling or rugby?
Hurling.
Day or night?
Day.
Spots or stripes?
Actually, sorry, I'm going to go back. I'm going to change that. I'm going to change it to night.
Yeah. Spots or stripes?
Stripes.
Brown or pink?
Brown.
Sunrise or sunset?
Sunset.
Kerry or Dublin?
Ballia all the way. That's the county I was born in.
England or Germany?
Ooh. I'm going to say Germany because I believe I was conceived in Germany, and that's where I got my name Carl from.
Buddhism or Catholicism?
Catholicism.
Gardening or gym?
Gym.
Boccherini or Echo and the Bunnymen?
Say that one again.
Boccherini or Echo and the Bunnymen?
Boccherini.
House or techno?
They're both electronic music. I'm gonna go. No, I don't know which one.
If it's too difficult to skip.
Both. I'm gonna go with house, really, because that's where it really comes from. It comes out of Chicago house, so proper electronic music. I'm gonna go with house there.
Just as a segue, right? In Limerick a few years ago, a mate of mine organised for a gig for Farley Jackmaster Funk to come and play at the Globe. And there was another DJ called Lisa Lashes playing in the pleasure rooms the same night. So hardly anyone came, which just made it even cooler. And one of the godfathers of Chicago house was playing in Limerick, and you could actually move in the place and dance and walk around. And that was just phenomenal. We could talk another 90 minutes on house music, so I won't go there. Seaweed or cabbage?
Oh, cabbage. I love cabbage.
Onions or carrots?
Onions.
Salt or pepper?
Salt.
Silver or gold?
Gold.
Meat or cheese?
Meat.
Beer or wine?
Beer. Electric lemonade all the way.
And finally, beach or forest?
Forest.
So James Collins, YouTuber, YouTube sensation, and what else would you call yourself? A raconteur. I'd say you'd be a great storyteller. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Menscape The Podcast, and I hope you will be well. And thanks for joining us.
And I'd just like to say, thanks, Carl. It was absolutely fantastic experience. I can't believe you just said 90 minutes, so it's probably about 95 minutes now. So that's like really a feature-length movie, an hour and 35 minutes. It's absolutely just breezed by. Really enjoyed it. So and hello to everybody that's actually going to be checking out this video, and this is it. Chin up, chest out. Keep it high vibration. Keep it high vibration.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and God bless.
Cheers.
Cheers, man.
Menscape, the podcast with Carl.J. Ashley.